know your name, I swear I do. It's on the tip of my tongue. Sorry, what did you say? I've known you for how long? Your face is so familiar, but no name comes to mind. Please, can you remind me if you'll be so kind? Staring out into space, asking God to hear my case. Trying to think of all things past. How long will my memory last?
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I am your host and founder of Alzheimer Speaks. In fact, I was kind of surprised today. I saw on LinkedIn it was my 10th anniversary, and I didn't even realize that. And so thank you for all those that reached out and kind of lifted my spirits with that. This has been quite a journey. My mom had dementia for 30 years, and so it was life-changing, and I decided to step into this space and try to make a difference. And so here on Alzheimer Speaks, all voices are welcomed. We truly believe that we can't move the pendulum forward if we're not having a conversation and being inclusive. And so it's just an honor to have created this advocacy-based platform, and the radio show is just one of them. We do video chats with people who actually are living with the diagnosis of dementia. We have a blog, a resource site, and I do speaking and training and consulting as well. And so it's really been a privilege and an honor. And this month, in case you don't know, September is Dementia Awareness Month. And so it's, I guess it seems fitting that it's my 10th anniversary in this month. I also want to thank our audience listeners because your loyalty has just touched my heart so deeply. Your likes, your clicks, your shares, they are valuable, and they're pushing this information out, and all of these voices, services, and products and tools that people have created to improve our dementia care out into the universe. And, you know, sharing it with your family and friends and colleagues is again, making a massive difference. You've gotten us recognized by Oprah, Maria Shriver, and Dr. Oz, and now AARP of Minnesota as a disruptor and a inspiring leader, and we wouldn't have done that without you. That happened because of you. So again, thank you so much. And keep in mind that we'd love to hear your story as well. So reach out to me through the radio show, or you can just go to alzheimerspeaks.com and call me or shoot me an email, you know, whatever works for you. And you can join our conversation today as well at 323-870-4602. That's 323-870-4602. Now, before I introduce our guest today, of course, I have to mention that it is 9/11, and just want to send prayers and comfort to all of those who lost a loved one or a coworker or a friend or an acquaintance who died or sustained physical, mental, or emotional injuries. This has just had such a huge impact on our country and the world at large, and it's nice to see how we are still honoring those who lost their lives or, became disabled or injured through this process, or who have fought for us, from firefighters and police and EMTs to the neighbors on the street pitching in to help. And again, our armed services who continue to be there. And I hope you all feel the power of our presence, our love, and our respect. We honor you all. Now, our show today is going to be a really interesting one, and one that I am very passionate about, because I don't think we hear this story enough. You see, Alzheimer's and dementia knows no barriers, and yet we don't really hear a lot of stories, and especially love stories from our LGBT community. And so today we are going to address and hear a beautiful, passionate love story from Michael Horvich, who cared for his husband. And I'm excited to get this out because, again, I think these voices need to be heard, just like so many other cultures. We need to hear from everybody to make sure that we're serving them. And, although there has been some strides made, there are still so many communities that are dealing with dementia and are underserved, and that needs to change. So today, again, we are lucky to have Michael Horvich with us, who is going to share his beautiful love story with his husband, Gregory, who developed dementia. And Michael's going to set the stage of their long-term relationship, how they dealt with Alzheimer's disease, and held on to their love for one another throughout the journey. Now, Michael holds a BA in Liberal Arts and Sciences from the University of Illinois, and he also has a degree work at the Hunter College in New York, his master's as an education generalist with a concentration in gifted education from the National Louis University of Everson, and an advanced certificate in education administration and supervision from the U of I in Urbana. And so this guy, he can't stay still, and you're going to hear that in my next comment here. You see, he worked as an elementary and a university teacher for 30 years, and he's been retired for 20. But in the meantime, he's gotten even more active as an educator, a speaker, a story writer, a storyteller, a poet, a photographer, a blogger, an artist, a jeweler, a lecturer, an actor, and a museum curator. And those are just to name a few, until dementia knocked on their door. And then he became a full-time care partner for his husband, Michael. So, or for his husband, Gregory, I'm sorry. Michael, welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Lori. I'm looking forward to spending the hour with you and our listeners.
Yeah, I want you to start out and just tell people a little bit more, if you can give us a little more background as to yours and Gregory's story. And just give us, because I know it's a long-term relationship, just a snippet of how you met and what your life was like before dementia hit.
Sure. First of all, I too want to say that in many ways I'm humbled by today's auspicious, 17 years since the towers came down and many lives were lost. And I'm humbled when I tell my story, because I think that when any catastrophic illness or experience strikes, whether it's dementia, Alzheimer's, cancer, suicide, accidental or sudden death, whatever, the true colors of the people involved in the caregiving team rise to the top, and they're there to take care of what needs to be taken care of. So again, as you mentioned, a shout out to all of those people who were able to get through that horrible event and keep going. I also want to mention that if I do get choked up, I might pause for a moment. This is a very personal story. I'm very comfortable in crying in front of an audience. It's just that it's awfully hard to talk and cry at the same time. So if I do get choked up, I might disappear for a moment, take a few deep breaths, but I'll be right back probably before you even notice that I left.
Okay.
Let me tell you, Gregory and I lived in a same-sex committed relationship for over 41 years. It's amazing how time flies. Most likely, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, although I'm not sure that it wasn't maybe front lobe type of dementia in the 29th year of our relationship. And it was also early onset. He was 55 years old. Also, I might mention I'm not really the expert in the field of dementia and Alzheimer's, but rather someone who's experienced it directly and intensely. So, that's part of the story. You mentioned some of my accolades and busyness. Thank you. Let me mention that Greg earned his BA at Wesleyan University in Connecticut and received his master's degree from Harvard University, where he studied architecture with Phi Beta Kappa recognition. He had his own high-end architecture and interior design firm. The firm was architect of record for many of the renovations going on at the Baha'i National Shrine in the suburb of Chicago, Illinois. He was a writer, an artist, well-versed in music, art history, concert-level pianist, spoke French, and won many awards for his architecture and interior design skills. So one thing that I'll say is that we always lived a very full life up until the diagnosis. And when we received the diagnosis, we decided that we had a choice to lie down and die or to hunker down and keep going. And the thing that is so important that we knew and practiced was that a diagnosis of dementia is not a death sentence. One can live well and full and make the most use of the time that you're allowed with the illness. And one of the things that I'll say about Greg is he was not a victim of Alzheimer's, but rather he was a hero. In looking back, we're coming up on the anniversary of his death, which is October 4th. It'll be 3 years. And I'm slowly being able to say that neither of us were victims of Alzheimer's, but we were both heroes, and we lived as well as possible, never referring to it only as his diagnosis, but also referring to it as our diagnosis. And we were relieved a little bit to receive the diagnosis because at least we knew what was going on, although we didn't really understand the nature of the roller coaster ride that we would be on until his death. I think the major change that took place was that our life became more narrow as we focused on dealing with the dementia, on redefining our sense of love, relationship, family, and home to meet Greg's changing needs. And as the disease progressed, having to redefine those sometimes took place on a weekly, a daily, and sometimes even an hourly basis. It's easy to look back and talk about all of this, much easier than it was to live through it. I think that most of your audience knows that dementia, Alzheimer's, is not just a memory problem. It includes not only cognitive issues, but also physical, mental, I'm listing, psychological, physiological, social, emotional, medical. And then it gets complicated by the many ways that it expresses itself, usually differently for each person, but there are also, I believe, some universalities in how it expresses itself among people's experiences with it. So I was retired by then. The state had a buyout, so I was able to retire actually when I was 50, and was able to devote myself to help Greg live as well as possible during that time, to help him compensate for his disappearing abilities while trying very hard to make sure that the respect and communication, which had defined our relationship, never faltered. Although as the disease progressed, that was a little bit more difficult. Friends and family would say, Michael, you're just so good, you're so wonderful. And yet I would beat myself up anyway because I wasn't always as good as I could have been. Sometimes the fear of the disease would speak through me, my frustrations. People would say, Michael, you're only human. But very honestly, that wasn't good enough. I talk about my sainthood rating. And for a Jewish person, that's interesting. But if my sainthood rating went below an 8, I would feel bad. I was easy to apologize when I was mean to Greg. And often he said to me, Michael, I don't expect you to change. Just be there for me. And that's, what I worked really hard at. And we had a great 12 years living with the Alzheimer's. And I'm really grateful for all that time together. Grateful that I was able to support Greg, and even in the midst of all of his changes, that he was able to be there for me. And again, our love never faltered. We took care of legal stuff like power of attorney, power over health and all over finances. Being a same-sex couple, we had to have other permissions in place. I'll give you an example. Holding power of attorney for health over Greg, I, for instance, could make a decision to turn off life support and let him pass, but the hospital wouldn't necessarily have to let me sit next to him and hold his hand while he was dying because I wasn't family. So we had to have special papers and permissions drawn up. It's a little easier nowadays with same-sex couples being able to marry, because then all of those privileges come along. But there are many gay couples that are not married, or gay men and women who are living alone, and that makes the care a lot more difficult. I might mention that living in Chicago, Evanston, which is a suburb of Chicago, we were fortunate in that I was never challenged because of the fact that we were a gay couple. Maybe that was because I was kind of in their face and that I didn't come in apologizing. And I acknowledged that we are a gay couple. I hold power over Gregory's decisions, and unspoken, probably letting them know that you're dealing with me and don't mess. And nobody did. People were very comfortable. People were very respectful of our relationship. And I never did encounter any difficulties because of the fact that we were a gay couple. But I know that's not true for so many people out there, not only, dealing with medical situations, but very often families kind of turn ugly in these kind of difficult situations. Greg's family was always very supportive and loving to this day. They are my family. His nieces and nephews are my nieces and nephews. And they're always very supportive in recognizing me, basically as Greg's spouse. What's interesting, it was nice hearing you say that Greg was my husband. In the beginning, I'm an older gay. I'm 73 years old, and so I come from the era that if Greg's the husband, does that mean I'm the bride or the wife? and there was always that confusion. So I would refer to him as my life partner, my spouse, my significant other. But in this brief, short period where gay rights for men and women have come so far, I am comfortable now with calling him my husband. Just like now there can be two wives, two husbands, two daddies, two mommies. And in most areas we've come so far, like in Alzheimer's, dementia, we have further to go in relation to gay rights. Currently, in our world situation in the United States, it's subject to being threatened again. Chances are we will never go back in the closet, and no matter how hard we're pushed. Not only chances are, but that won't happen. So that always makes it a little bit more difficult. So I'm kind of rambling a little bit. Let me just say that even though our life narrowed because of Greg's abilities, we did a lot. We entertained. We traveled the world, sometimes for a month at a time. We entertained family and friends. We cooked at home. We went to the opera and other theater events. Traveled Europe, Mexico, U.S. We were able to simplify our life by only keeping the most meaningful parts. Again, I was retired. At a certain point, we closed Greg's business, and we had a wonderful life for as long as we could. At a certain point, Greg was not able to do as much, and he became more diminished. He was able to be at home with me for about 10 and a half out of the 12 years that we lived with Alzheimer's. But at a certain point, short of turning the condo into a 24/7 medical ward, I, as a person single here with him in the condo, was not able to meet his needs. And we were very fortunate in finding a wonderful memory care facility, the Lieberman Center in Skokie, which is about 10 minutes away. And I was able to visit every day. The staff at the center were wonderful. I was part of all of the decisions that were made on Greg's behalf. And I was able to hire a daycare man to be with him because towards the middle and end, Greg had pretty much lost language, so he wasn't able to express his needs, wasn't able to feed himself, hydrate himself, bathroom himself. And no matter how good of a memory care facility you have, and many of them have bad reps, but no matter how good of one you can find, it's as if there's never enough time to be able to provide for the needs. Unfortunately, bottom line profits often dictate how the centers staff and provide, and sometimes the needs are such that even if they were to provide double the amount of staff providing for what the social emotional needs would be a lot more difficult.
Sure.
So having the daycare guy with him gave me peace of mind. He and Greg developed a beautiful relationship, and again, Greg lived as well as possible. Doesn't mean he wasn't frustrated and confused and frightened. Sometimes, every now and then, he would strike out, but you can't really call it violence because the striking out was more because of the confusion and frustration. Not because he was a mean or aggressive person. But for the most part, he was content and happy, enjoyed the facility, enjoyed his new sense of community. I think he enjoyed the more narrow range of responsibilities and focus that his life took, and if that was good enough for him, it was good enough for me. And hospice, then I might mention, was involved for the last 9 months. I use the word progress, which is a strange use of that word, but as long as the person diagnosed with dementia, Alzheimer's, is progressing with the illness, you're entitled to hospice. And the care that they gave was so amazingly wonderful. And also they helped me cope, understand the trajectory of the disease, understand the process of dying, and they really made a situation that's never easy a little bit easier. I did get a call, maybe 3 days before Greg passed, that they thought Greg was preparing himself to pass, and he was in a coma for those 3 days. And I didn't feel the need to keep a vigil because of the nurses were doing such a good job. And knowing Greg, I decided that he most likely needed, even though he was in his non-responsive coma, that privacy and solitude was important to him, and it had always been throughout our relationship, and that my being in the room when he passed would only make it more difficult for him, because of our great love for each other. And so on the day before he passed, I crawled into bed with him and put my head on his shoulder. I apologized again for those times that I had been mean or had lacked compassion. What I heard him say, although it was in my mind, so maybe it was him, maybe it wasn't, was, "Michael, even as you were being mean, I was forgiving you. So don't beat yourself up. And that kind of made me feel a little bit more content. He and I had this conversation before. I said, when you're ready, leave. When you're ready, die and beyond. Be done with your current set of circumstances. And I'll miss you, but I love you, and I will be okay. And then a little miracle kind of happened. I got out of bed, and I kissed him on his open mouth 3 times. And again, this is a non-responsive and in a coma for 3 days. And on the 3rd kiss, he briefly opened his eyes and kissed me back. And that was his goodbye. And he passed the next day.
Wow.
Grief, I can't even begin to talk about grief. Everybody goes through it in their own way. When you have a great love, obviously the grief is going to be great and difficult, but you need to do it in your own way and do it in your own time. I did have some people who said, come on, Michael, you got to get on with it. And I would say, don't tell me how to grieve. I'll get on with it when I'm ready. And there are some theories out there that grief never really disappears or ends. It's just that you continue to grow larger than the grief as you establish your new life without your loved one. And for me, I think that's true. I will always carry that grief, but it is easier, and I have moved on to continue my life, to live in a meaningful way, in a way that I can enjoy life and have fun, in a way that I can continue to tell Gregory and my love story, to let other LGBT community people know you're not alone. As you mentioned, I've done some research on that. There's very little out there in support of LGBT partners who are going through what I went through. So my telling the story feels good to be able to again say, you're not alone.
Exactly.
Why don't I stop there and let you ask me a few questions or
decide
how to proceed?
First I want to just hit some points because you put some things very eloquently. I loved you stating we weren't victims, we were heroes. You weren't sufferers, you were survivors. It wasn't his diagnosis, it was ours. I mean, you guys were in this together, and the disappearing abilities. You focused on the abilities, and as they peeled away, you still grasped hold of what abilities were there, where you could find joy. And I loved how you still lived a full life. You didn't turn your life over to this disease. You didn't walk away, which for many is hard because the doctors kind of set you up for that. Many of them,
They do.
Get your papers in order. You don't have much time, and they push you out the door, maybe with a prescription and always another appointment, but not a lot of resources and not a lot of hope.
No.
And so I love that the two of you were able to go through that. I loved your rating of your sainthood. I think that's brilliant the way you phrase that, because I think so many care partners or care companions or caregivers or carers, whatever you term it, we beat ourselves up really bad, and our inner critic can just be screaming at us. And for you to find kind of a scale point, and then to be able to talk with him about it and say, I love when Greg said to you, I don't expect you to change. I love who you are. And you did that before,
Exactly.
And I did it before. We're human. We have a range of emotions, and don't lose that, and don't feel guilty for having those. Let's just move through those. Are you talking about?
But I would say I will add that doesn't mean that you don't feel guilty anyway, but you're maybe better able to throw that off and move on. After his death, I think part of the grieving process was reliving all those times that I was not as nice as I could have been, and then forgiving myself interesting. I never felt I had to forgive Greg. I mean, the blame never went towards him, and in some ways, never towards the disease. It just was, and you get through it. You know, sometimes someone's ill, and someone will say to you, "Oh, you know, I'm going to pray for that everything gets better." And sometimes better is not on this side of life. Sometimes it gets better for the other person because of the fact that they're able to pass and move on. And I again, I think as I get older, it's a little easier to embrace the fact that if you embrace life fully, you also have to embrace death as part of the partnership. What makes life so wonderful is the fact that you know death is there on your doorstep, and you probably knew that since the day you were born. And when you're able to begin, I think, to welcome death, it makes you able to live life more fully, with fewer apologies, and certainly, again, a lesser amount of guilt. So by now I have been able, I think, which is why I said recently I'm able to say I'm a hero as well. I don't feel guilty anymore. I know I did the best job I could. I know that Greg knew how much I loved him right up until the last minute, and how much he loved me, and it feels good. I might throw in a plug for one of the links on your page there that people can go to for Alzheimer's: A Love Story, which was a beautiful documentary that was made about Greg and me maybe about 4 or 5 months before he passed. Ironically, it was made by the son of his college roommate and best friend. The son was attending Chapman University. And what this team of college students, four people, were able to do was to take Gregory and my 41-year love relationship, our 12 years of living with Alzheimer's, dementia, and distilling it into a beautiful 15-minute love story. And it's won over acceptance into over 90 film festivals, which is like just blown me away. We've received 25 awards, which is just, I continue to be amazed at. The two most prestigious of which were from the American Pavilion of the Cannes Film Festival. And people can see the documentary if they choose. It's free on Amazon Prime, or I think for $2.99 you can watch it on Amazon, on Vimeo, and I think Seed and Spark. It's like all there in your links. And and I've also been making presentations, talking to book clubs, church groups, doctors groups, medical students. I think the biggest presentations I made, one was to the North Shore University Healthcare System, which is one of the top systems in the Chicago area. And then at a recent Alzheimer's disease international conference in Chicago here. And again, I'm amazed that people received the story. And I had about 150 people. I was the first presenter in our session at the ADI conference, and I told the story in the best way that I could. I did get choked up then, but I did deep breathe and keep going, and ended up receiving a standing ovation from 150 people in the session. And that just, again, blew me away, because you have to remember, I came out during a time and an experience of homosexuality, wasn't called gay yet, when it was not talked about in private and public and polite conversations, that you would walk down the street and have people yell at you faggot, or if you happen to be in a gay neighborhood and you're walking down the street coming home from a couple drinks with friends at a local bar, being beat up or chased or just even walking along the street in fear, looking over your shoulder. And in many ways, I guess I still carry that with me. So I'm still so amazed, I guess, and pleased that Gregory and my story is receiving such attention and love back. As much as I loved Gregory, it's like we're getting that much love back and that just is very gratifying to me. And and again, I thank you in part for letting me share the story on your wonderful program.
Well, thank you. It's love is love is love, and it doesn't make any difference. It's deep and it's touching, and it needs to be respected. And one of the things that I wanted to touch base with you on is, if you had to do anything over, during your 12 years with Gregory, what would you do differently, or are you really comfortable in how you lived and dealt with the disease?
Well, in many ways, I think we really did a good job. And again, I use the word we. I think we both did a really good job. I wasn't always perfect, as I mentioned. And again, when my good rating dropped down to a 7.5, or I was really upset with myself, I had to get it up to at least over an 8. And the closer to 10 I could get it, the nicer. But there are things that I would have done differently if I had known better. The more I learn about the disease, there are more ways that you can deal with the nonverbal communications from the person affected to be able to understand what it is that they're going through. I've befriended a number of people who are diagnosed with dementia, and they're still able to be so clear and articulate and beautifully express what it is that they go through, to give me a better understanding of what Greg must have gone through. Because even though I tried to talk about it with him, I think there was a buffer there where he didn't really understand what he was going through or wasn't able to articulate it. I think I would have spent a lot more time just sitting there holding his hand. I think I would have probably tried to be a little bit kinder, but again, when you're in the heat of the situation, you do the best you can. But for the most part, I think we really did do a wonderful job. And our life really was full with family and friends and food and entertainment and travel. In the midst of it, we bought a new condo in downtown Evanston. And even though by then I was doing most of the decision making, I was able to have Greg be my partner. Greg being an architect in interior design, I'd say, well, hon, what color do you think the living room should be? And he'd say, well, what do you think? And I'd say, well, here, look at these 2 paint chips. I like them both. And he says, I do too. Why don't you pick one of those? So in many ways, when he recognized that he wasn't able to be as active in the decision-making process, he was able to defer and give me that ability. And so again, I do feel full. I do feel content. I would love to have him back, but obviously that's not possible. And I would never want to have him back if he had to be the way he was towards the end of the disease. And people will say to me, Michael, I'm so sorry, especially during the beginning of sharing and talking about him when he passed early on in passing. People would say, Michael, I'm so sorry. And I'll say, maybe I should just be above it and say thank you and be done, but that's not who I am. I need to say, I am not sorry that Gregory died. I miss him. I'm sad. I'm lonely. But I'm happy that he decided it was time for him to move on. And how selfish would it be of me to want to keep him here just because I wanted to keep him here? That's not part of any relationship. And that doesn't respect, I don't think, any relationship. Again, he was ready to move on, and I gave him my blessing and permission if he needed it. But I wanted to make sure that he didn't feel he had to hang on to make me feel better, because what made me feel better was the fact that he decided to leave.
Yeah,
so that's
so
my
he was
long answer to your short question.
Well,
I feel full. No, I wouldn't have done anything differently, I don't think.
Well, and I loved that when you answered that, you said I would probably hold his hand more. It wasn't anything big or fancy. It was just that simple connection of being together and being
Yes.
present. And I think so often in this fast-paced life that we live nowadays is we blow past the beauty of and the power of the simple things of life, the ones that really fill our hearts and our souls. Maybe not our bank books or our portfolios, but it fills us as a being. And I think I think we have to get back to valuing that more. And one of the things I'm going to just do a plug here for a new organization to the U.S. It's called World Kindness USA. And you can find out more about them by just going to worldkindnessusa.org. But they're all about elevating the goodness within us and how we treat one another. And it really is, for the most part, it's the simple stories that are shared that, it is good. It is powerful to be living in this time. And, we hear so much negativity that's out there. And it's nice to hear stories like yours and Gregory's. It's just, I think it's good for all of our souls. I also liked when you mentioned that, about the guilt, that you could let it go, but I mean, it was still there. But one of the things that I noticed in my role with my mom, and I see it in so many others, and I hear it from them too, is we raise the standards of who we're supposed to be when we're caring for someone else, that we're supposed to be perfect, that we're not supposed to have those lapses. And yet every person I've talked to with dementia, like Gregory, says, I forgive you. I don't even need to forgive you. That's who you are. This is our relationship. This is part of life. This is how we've always been. It's just us.
Yes.
And
yes.
It's okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so again, having those conversations, I think with people is very, very important. Now, from finding
Let me
peace
before you ask that question, hold on to it for 1 minute. One of the humorous things that took place between Gregory and I is that after we had kind of a misunderstanding blow up and we both apologized, we laughed and said, we're a married couple, and married couples always fight. So this is how we fight. It's just that it's about Alzheimer's.
Yep.
And so the fact that we would have these fights, quote unquote, we're okay because that everybody fights. Also,
Yep.
Gregory had posted right next to his bed 3 words: love, simplicity, and compassion. And you had mentioned all 3 of those in your comment before about sometimes it's the simple things that are so important. And certainly they were important to Gregory and me as well. I'm sorry, then go ahead.
No, that's fine. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is how did you find kind of a peace of mind and solace and comfort with this journey? You had mentioned, religion, your relationship. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. Let me preface it by saying these are my personal views. They're what helped Gregory and what helped me especially to find peace of mind and to cope. I think whatever religious or spiritual avenue a person takes to make themselves feel better in light of a horrible, difficult situation is important. I was raised as a Jew, but Judaism never really gave me contact with a personal God or understanding or peace of mind. Maybe it was because I was not as educated or studied, even though I did have my bar mitzvah and went to temple very often. Gregory, so now I consider myself a cultural Jew because I do embrace the culture of Judaism. Gregory considered himself what did he call himself? He was raised Catholic, but he kind of reclaimed himself as a recovered Catholic because, again, he never found peace or solace in the church or in their teachings. Both of us had always been interested in the teachings of Buddha. Buddhism in many ways is not a religion, but it's a belief system. And about halfway through our diagnosis, about year 6 or 7, when I was kind of at my lowest, I decided that I just needed to develop a way to get away from myself because I just could not remove myself from the situation day to day, living and coping with dementia. And so I ended up signing up for a Buddhist meditation class, and discovered a woman who I call my guru. She always gets embarrassed when I call her that, but she really did, through helping me understand meditation, find some peace of mind. I've gone on to read and study and think a lot about Buddhism. And for me, that's where I find peace of mind and comfort. And I attribute getting through Gregory and my ordeal. We didn't suffer, but it was an ordeal at times, with a certain amount of peace of mind. I do attribute that to my studies in Buddhism. So again, I think for anybody that has faith in something or a spiritual relationship to anything, that is going to help you through. I think the biggest message I always got as I meditated was, quote unquote, Michael, you are not alone. There are forces greater than you could ever hope to begin to imagine. They are there to be with you and to support you. A lot of people would say, see, Michael, that's God. And I'd say, well, I appreciate that, but in my mind, I don't know what to call that. Maybe a power. Maybe I'm the spark of that power. Maybe Greg was a spark of that power, and now he's reunited with that power. If you want to call it God, I respect that. If you want to say you're praying for me, I respect that. But for me, it's different than that. And again, I think it, as I said before, faith in anything and spirituality in something, and that should be able to help you through.
Okay, great. We only have a little over 10 minutes left, but I wanted to ask you, you've really done a wonderful job kind of explaining. I feel like I know Gregory, which is fun. And
thank you.
But I would like to, if you wouldn't mind, if you would share some of your advice to give others about loving and living fully with someone with dementia, or form of it.
Yeah, it's kind of a hard one. I think probably what you need to do is understand that the overarching guidance system is to capitalize on the love that you have for the person. It's I think sometimes when you're in the heat of the difficulty of day-to-day living with dementia, it's easy to forget the love. But if you're able to remind yourself of that love, I think that makes it a little easier. For example, at the point that Gregory was having trouble getting dressed, I would go to the trouble of getting all of his clothes out, laying them neatly on the bench in the bedroom, so that he didn't have to worry about that anymore, because he really couldn't do that anymore. And so then what he would do is he would take the underwear into the bathroom and wash his face, brush his teeth, and then come out and not know what to do. And I'd get pissed. And I'd say, Gregory, you just took the underwear in the bathroom. I mean, here I was taking all this extra energy to lay out his clothes, and even that wasn't working. Well, in looking back, obviously I wasn't mad at Gregory. I was mad at the situation. I was angry with the fact that this wasn't running smoothly, but he wasn't doing that on purpose. He wasn't doing that to help me, hurt me, or upset me. So, you just have to take some deep breaths and keep going. Another thing that helped me is I turned to writing. Being an educator, I've always written. I've taught English and writing to younger students. I taught them the importance of keeping a journal. And so what would happen is at the point that Greg and I were no longer able to talk about these situations that we would go through that would backfire on me, I used to call that Alzheimer's always wins. I was able to then go and sit down at my computer and write about the experience and process my emotions and come to conclusions. And that gave me closure and made me feel better. So it's like the computer became part of Gregory and my relationship because we had been so used to talking things through and discussing things, coming to consensus, understanding, forgiving, and all of a sudden that all started disappearing and being shaky. So I could rely on my computer to give me that processing ability. And then I turned that into a blog, which was fairly well received by family and friends because it was a way to keep them abreast of what was going on with Greg and me, but also many other people out there who just needed some of that advice through finding out what others are doing and lessons other people are learning. So by turning to writing, that really helped me a lot. Advice people always give to you, which I resent, is be good to yourself. And I always wanted to get mad at them and say, don't tell me how to behave or what to do. I'm doing the best I can. But the reality is you really do need to be good to yourself. At a certain point, I hired some young companions from Northwestern University to be with Greg, and they would go about their business. They'd go to the show or they'd go shopping and cook dinner, and I'd just disappear. And having that time to myself really helped. I had to go out of my way to be good to myself. One of the young companions, well, they all became family, but one of them became such family that I had confidence enough to let him stay in the condo with Greg on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I took a deep breath and took myself on a vacation to New Orleans. It was refreshing and renewing, and I had a great time. I was lonely being in New Orleans without Greg, but I also felt really good on coming back that I had taken that opportunity and that I was good to myself. It's hard to be good to yourself when the person you love so dearly is doing the best they can, and you are too, and it sometimes feels like you're in a drive around and you're going round and round and round in circles and don't even know where the next stop is going to be. The concept of long-term grief and anticipatory grief has a toll on a caregiver, and I think when you're aware of that, you can start to be a little bit better to yourself, anticipating what's the next loss, what's the next ability that's going to fail. When am I going to get upset again with him? When am I going to get to the point where I don't know how to take care of him or what to do? Anticipating those losses and then over time takes a toll. And the caregiver is affected with this long-term grief, not only emotionally but mentally and physically. And don't the statistics say that very often the caregiver dies first because they stop taking care of themselves and they're so stressed out and or miss their own doctor's appointments, et cetera, and therefore they end up predeceasing the person with the diagnosis of Alzheimer's. So you really do need to be better to yourself. Another piece of advice is internet a lot, read a lot. But what I found is I'd buy a book and read it, but then I put it down because I didn't want to know what the future was going to bring. So I didn't want to get into that part of the book that talked much past where I was with Gregory at the stage we were at, because I didn't need to know what was coming next. Also, again, a sense of family and home and love and relationship is where you put your energies, not necessarily medicalizing or depending on the doctors. What can a doctor really do when you're dealing with an uncurable disease that's going to progress no matter what. The doctors were there towards the end to help make Greg's life and his passing as comfortable as possible. But during the heat of the Alzheimer's, doctors cannot do much. And sometimes I think that they're just as intimidated by not knowing what to say or not knowing what to do. And maybe a place that the doctors could improve is at least know how to refer you to get support from a religious group, from a social worker, from the internet, from reading, as opposed to just scheduling your next appointment. I started telling the doctors I don't want to come back quarterly. I'll see you next year, because they only confirmed what I already knew. Not their fault. They're doing the best they can, I think, but they could do a little bit better with some dissemination of where to go for support. So
exactly.
that's kind of me rambling on a little bit about advice to others.
Okay. Well,
do the best
good.
you can. Do the best you can, you know.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you talked about adapting to, as the disease progresses, and that's what we do in all of life, but we seem to look at it different when someone gets sick. But all of life, it's natural for us to adapt and to change and to try to, how do I want to say, try to amplify our abilities, and no matter what situation it is. That's just kind of human nature. And so it doesn't change with disease. Or it shouldn't change if you really want to live fully. I agree with you with journaling and speaking and talking openly about it. It is empowering. It is. I found it psychologically helpful. But one of the things that I saw was, people want to fix you if they see that you're grieving or if you're frustrated. And I always remind people that sometimes I just need to vent. I just need to release what's inside me and know it's in a safe spot and know that you're still here for me, but we can't fix this, but I just need to get it out so that I can move on. And so sometimes just being a listening post can be so helpful, to someone who is dealing with anything, and then ask if you want to, do you want some help? And if so, what could I do? I loved how you corrected people with verbiage and stuff, saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry."
As Gregory said, sometimes just be there. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. Sometimes, as I wanted to do more with Greg, just sitting there with the person who's grieving, just hold their hand. Just sit there, be there with them, and that does an amazing shares an amazing amount of love and compassion.
Exactly. And I love how you talk about growing larger than the grief. We're all chameleons in this life, and we're always changing and molding into something new, and all types of emotions are normal, and yet in society we shun many of them. And, we're told we shouldn't have them, but we all have them. And so I think if we talk about them, we'll probably have less intensity of some of the ones that we don't really like hanging around with. If we're just honest, people won't bubble it up in a cage.
And part of that new understanding and growing larger than the grief is that sometimes then, and for me even 3 years later, and probably for the rest of my life, a song, an occasion, a holiday, a birthday comes up. It's as if you just spiral right back to the beginning of that grief and the strength of it. And I think you just need to allow it some time and then get back on the bicycle and keep riding, and you'll find that you can get back to that larger look at life again more easily. But grief does have a way of periodically showing up again, and it'll be there probably forever.
Yep, exactly. Well, we need to wrap up here, so we have listed your website, horvich.com. You can also get the Alzheimer's Love Story, a 15-minute documentary by going there. Michael also writes a blog, which is, again, listed on the site. You can just click on that and go to it. And then he's written some poetry that you can see at Barnes & Noble or pick up on Amazon as well. Thank you so much for being with us. I think this was a really informative conversation and very, very, very hopeful. So thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story, Michael.
And thank you so much, Lori, for being there for me and for the opportunity to share the story.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
It's time to rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Hey everybody, Jared Sebesti here, host of Retire Repurposed. Now this podcast is about the non-financial parts of retirement, which many times can be even more challenging than the financial. We believe retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful, purposeful, and fulfilling season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. To listen now, search Retire Repurposed on your favorite podcast platform, Senior Resource, or Life Audio.